your next step. So I just wanted to let you know that a couple of things. First off, don't get yourself too overwhelmed. Just try your best. And then once you're at a UC, just know you have all the experience and the intelligence that you've received at Rio Hondo to be successful at the UC system. Believe me, don't take this experience for granted. It's very useful. And where you're there, just hit the ground running, and you're going to be very successful at any UC institution that accepts you. So without to continue here on the personal insight questions, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, everybody should be able to see that. And we're going to start off with the video, okay? This kind of gives you an overview of the personal insight questions, and you'll also hear messages from the directors of admissions from different UCs.
Okay, you're about to start the personal insight questions for the UC undergrad application. Stressful, I know. So here are some tips on what the questions are about and what they cover.
What are the personal insight questions? And what kind of topics will they be covering?
So the personal insight questions provide the admissions officers with an opportunity to get to know you as a person beyond the GPA and the test scores and also the kinds of courses that you've taken. It's really our attempt to hear who you are, to hear your authentic voice. It just gives us a much better understanding of you as a person. And that's really the goal, is to have you express who you are to us in the written form.
So for our freshman applicants, we're actually giving 8 options, and the student needs to choose 4 questions to answer. We actually are asking students to really think about what leadership means and creativity and the opportunity for them to explain their own background, perhaps in a short set of words, but in a very powerful way that directly answers the question.
So transfer students need to respond particularly to one question regarding your major. In addition to that, there are 3 of 7 other questions that you'll need to choose from. Similar to freshman applicants, we want to learn more about your experiences. Maybe you've had responsibilities working, maybe you've taken advantage of research at your school, leadership skills, whatever it is, again, that you bring to the table. We want to hear more from you about that.
So basically you're saying freshman applicants, you'll have 8 questions to choose from and must answer 4 of them. Transfer applicants, you'll also have to answer 4, but one of them is required and about your major. And last but not least, the maximum amount of words allowed per question is 350 words.
So which ones do I pick? Does it matter?
I think that's a fair question, and a question that a lot of students may wonder about. All the questions that you have to select from are of equal value to the University of California and its campuses. So you select the questions that you feel you can provide us the greatest insight into. If you feel that there's questions that don't relate to you, don't respond to those questions. Pick the ones that are most relevant to you, your experience, your accomplishments, your background.
Well, I'm not really sure what the UC campuses are looking for. Is there anything specific?
There's no right or wrong answer to these questions. We're looking for your unique abilities and accomplishments and backgrounds, and we want to hear it in your unique voice. What's great about these questions is that they come from factors that we're already looking for in our admissions review. So no matter what you choose, you're already giving us what we're looking for.
It's really important, I think, to understand that in this process, in the same way that if you and I were in an elevator and we only had a few seconds and I asked you, who are you? What do you believe in? That you're able to explain to me and to the people reading the applications what you believe in, what inspires you.
So I'm not really the best writer. Do I need to worry about my writing and my vocabulary?
So it's not a writing test. However, we want you to make sure that you're displaying your best writing. So we want you to get it proofread, review it, make sure that you're looking for spelling and grammatical errors and correcting those, because those things can be distracting to the admissions reader. However, we want you to use your own words, your own vocabulary, be concise and be thorough in your writing, and proofread.
All right, I think I got it. I'm ready to get started. But where do I go for more information?
Okay, so in terms of getting started, first and foremost, you want to give yourself plenty of time And just remember that the personal insight questions are one of many different factors that we're considering when we're reviewing your application. So if you visit the admissions website, you can find more information that will help you get started, including worksheets and other resources. So definitely take advantage of all that is available online. Take a deep breath, know it will all be okay, and give it your best shot.
Okay. So to continue, kind of some of the points that were mentioned in the video that I want to stress. For one, this is one part of the application process in how we're going to make our decisions. However, it's one of many parts. Okay, and just keep in mind that what's really critical to the UC system is the required courses and the required major prep courses. Doing really well on the personal insight questions, it's not going to supplement not completing one of the required courses. So you just want to make sure you take care of your coursework. Going off of that, in terms of the personal insight questions, think of it as it's going to only enhance your application. It's going to give us some background about your experience. So it's going to add to the quality of your application. Don't stress out where you feel that if you do a bad response, that it's going to hurt your admissions. Just try your best. And it's gonna give us a view of your personal experience. So kind of the nuts and bolts, the things that you need to know is, as was mentioned in the video, you will have to respond to 4. The first one is required, and it is about your major. And then you have a selection of 7, and from the 7, you're gonna select 3, and that will make the total of 4. In terms of the number of words maximum that you can use is 350. And if you notice, we didn't put a minimum, we only put a maximum. And the reason for that is because we want to give you the opportunity that as long as you answer the response or the question, then that's good enough, okay? But if you need to use the entire 350 words, that's fine as well. But we also did that specifically so that we have the students get straight to the point and responding to the question. And as I mentioned in the video, all the questions have equal value, okay? There's no one question that we're looking out for, thinking that, oh, I hope they answer this question, or we're not thinking, oh, I've already read so many students responding to this one question. I wish, I could hear from a different response. That's not how we're evaluating these questions, okay? They're all evaluated uniquely, specifically on their own, and that's how we're gonna score them. So moving along down here, let's talk about the required question. And I'm gonna give you some things to consider. The required question reads, please describe how you have prepared for your intended major, including your readiness to succeed in your upper division courses. Now, one of the key things that we see in terms of students, just a simple mistake that they do is that when they start responding to the question, but then they go on a tangent and they start talking about something totally different. Okay, so make sure that your response specifically answers the question. So once you're done with the response, go back to it and ask yourself, am I answering the question? And in this particular question, if you notice, there's 2 parts to it. It says, please describe how you have prepared for your intended major. So how have you prepared? And then it also says, include your readiness to succeed in your upper division courses once you enroll at the university. So those are 2 points that you want to touch on, okay? You don't want to exclude one or write so much about one and then write very little about the other. Now, it doesn't have to be equal 50-50 in terms of your writing, but we just want you to address both of the points there. In this website that I gave you, and I'm noticing that there's a lot of students that are just jumping into this presentation, please go to the chat and I posted a website for this. I posted a link to this website. Please copy it and save it. It's gonna go over all this information that I'm reviewing. But going back to this required question, on this website, you're gonna see things to consider right under the question itself. And that's gonna be there for all 8 questions. And it gives you additional questions so that it helps you brainstorm ideas. So you can start brainstorming as to how you're going to respond to this. So in this first one, it says, how did your interest in your major develop? Okay, and that's something you can start brainstorming about. Or do you have any experience related to your major outside of the classroom? So start thinking, how is the intended major that I want to go into, how have I shown in things that I've done, whether in my community, in my city, for my church, for my school, what are these things, how are they related to the major that I want to pursue? Um, and there it gives you examples: volunteer work, internships, or employment, student organizations or activities. And it also tells you if you haven't had any experience in the field, you can consider including experiences in the classroom. Now, I don't want you to jump straight into the experiences in the classroom. Okay, really consider experiences outside the classroom. And the reason why it's because, for example, let's say a student wants to, go into political science. We know that this student has taken political science courses, right? That doesn't really make them stand out. But if they, for example, got involved in city politics or went to, the committee meetings, or the city hall meetings that they have, I think they have them like once a month, or maybe they're in the school politics at the community college, or maybe they volunteer to, promote one of the candidates, in their city. Things like that tells us that you have a desire to, really dive into this major. uh, but let's say, for example, you work, and you work in sales, but you want to go into political science. If that's the case, and you've taken advantage of, the classroom materials, and you really dove into a certain topic, where you've considered doing research on your own, for example, looking at different documentaries, or just going online and getting more familiar with the way, a government system runs, then you can use an experience that's related to your classroom. But I definitely want you to consider things that you've done outside first. And let me pause there for a second, because I know a lot of students, I get this all the time, where students feel that they haven't done much, especially transfer students. They feel like, well, I haven't done anything. And let me tell you, yes, you have. You probably don't recognize it, but yes, you have. And one tip that I want you to do, I want you to think of all the years and all the terms after high school. So let's say that you graduated from high school in spring of 2016. I want you to think, well, what did I do that summer? What did I do that fall of 2016? What did I do that spring of 2017? Just go, term by term, and start thinking of things that you've done. And believe me, you're gonna come out with a list. And based on that list, you're gonna start matching what's appropriate that will answer, this question, or what will answer this question. So do that exercise, and I think it's gonna help you really, not only provide some examples, but really give us a unique lens into your experience, because that's what's going to make you stand out. It's when you start talking about your personal experience, because nobody has the same personal experience. Even if they have similar, you know, um, something similar that they've overcome, the experiences are still very different. So that was just a tip there. But let's go over these following 7 additional questions that are listed there, where you're going to select 3. This first one, you see that it focuses on leadership. So we're asking students to provide, some positive experience that they've had with leadership. Now, you don't have to have a leadership, title. It doesn't have to be that you were the president of a club. You could have been the vice president. You could have been the treasurer. You could have been a founder. And this, the organizations, don't limit yourself to just organizations, at the community college. This could be organizations, in your community, in your church. It could be in your work. I know that a lot of transfer students, work as well. If you've been promoted, if you have an assistant manager position, if you're the leader of your team, those are all leadership positions, where you can use to answer, to this question. And this is really key. You'll notice that these questions are connected, to the university experience, because there's going to be opportunities at the university that you attend for you to take on leadership roles. Moving on to the second question, this one focuses more on creativity. What have you done that's creative? a good one that I saw from a student, just to give you an example of some positive ones that I've seen, and I'll also share some that weren't so great. Um, One student wrote how they broke their leg. I think they were skateboarding, and while they broke their leg, they put it in a cast. And while it was healing, the student decided to teach himself guitar. So they taught themselves guitar really well to the point where they started writing songs, and then they started recording these songs. That tells us that you're using a negative experience and you're using your creative mind to come up with something that's positive, um, and something that's useful to your community or to the people around you. So this was a very strong and powerful response because it told us the resilience of the student. So that's something that you want to look into if you do have a creative side, or even if you feel you don't have a creative side, but you had an experience where you did become creative so that you can overcome that experience. And like I mentioned, all the questions have things to consider. So these questions here, don't feel that you have to answer those questions. Those are just to help you brainstorm, okay? I don't want you to think that you have to answer every part of these things to consider question. Just like that point says, it's just things to consider, not things to respond to. What we want you to respond to are the questions that are here bolded, okay? The third question has to do with a talent or skill. So this looks into something that you're good at, something that you've developed over time. Um, Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're very good at a sport, and let's say you're very good at basketball. It is okay to write about the time that you've been playing basketball, let's say in high school, if you continue that after high school. So if you continue that at the college level, or the university level for some of you if you attended a university straight out of high school. However, we really don't want you to focus on your high school experience. So for example, let's go back to the basketball example. If you played basketball, but that was only in high school, then it's not something that you want to use to respond to this question, okay? But like I said, if you started in high school, but you continued, then definitely, go ahead and use that as a response. But tell us about your experience post high school. For these questions, we really want to know what you've done post high school, but I don't want you to think that you can absolutely ignore your high school experience. You could write your high school experience again only if it continues after high school. The following question talks about describe how you've taken advantage of significant educational opportunity. So within your community college, there are a variety of different opportunities. For example, the transfer center, it's giving you the opportunity to come here, sit in, and get a workshop on the personal insight questions. You're taking advantage of this opportunity. You're taking advantage of the services offered by the transfer center, so that you can put together a stronger application. Some of you may be part of EOPS. Some of you may be part of Puente. Those are significant education opportunities that you've taken advantage of so that you can elevate your educational experience. So you definitely want to, if you've been involved in any of those programs or you've been involved at the college level, and you've been part of an organization, or you've just been available to take advantage of certain opportunities that were presented to you, then definitely respond to this question. And as it was mentioned in the video, I just want to re-emphasize that you do want to choose questions that have the strongest relationship to your experience, because those are the ones that we feel are going to be written in a more powerful manner. This question, and we do get a lot of students that write about this question, and I want to make some points about this one. It says, describe the most significant challenge you have faced. We get a lot of responses where students focus just on that part of this question. They tell us about the significant challenge, right? And they write a very strong and powerful response. However, they ignore the second part of this question where it says, and the steps you have taken to overcome this challenge. Okay, we know that at the university, it's gonna be a little bit challenging. Okay, for many of you, you may go from a semester system to a quarter system, so it's gonna be faster. For some of you, you may have to move away from home, and you're gonna have to live on campus, or you're gonna go distance away. We want to know that you can overcome that challenge. We want to know that you can persevere. We want to know that you're resilient, that you can handle adversity, that you can overcome these challenges, that you have taken steps or you have used your critical thinking skills to find out resources on campus or within the campus to help you overcome any challenge that you're going to face at the university level. So make sure that, yes, explain to us your significant challenge, but also explain to us the steps that you have taken to overcome that challenge. Give us a glimpse into your experience that tells us, you know what, I was in this hole, but I was able to get out of it, by doing A, B, and C. The next question has to do with what have you done to make your school or your community a better place? So this is a little broader. If you can see, this gives you a lot of ways on how to answer it. Okay, you can think about your school, you can think about your community as a whole. Have you done any volunteer work for what organization or what institution? And I mentioned a lot. It could be for a church. It could be for a community organization that you volunteer for. It could be for the city that you volunteered for. It could be for your school. It could be that, maybe for a local elementary school. There are a variety of different organizations, within, communities that students have participated or volunteered. We want to know what you've done, and we want to know what you've done that's made that place better or made your community or your school better. So this is a little bit broader. It gives you a little bit more range as to how to respond to it. And then what we did with the last question, we made it very vague. And the reason why is because in case any of the previous questions, don't touch on your experience, this one really, opens it up so that any student can answer it. The seventh question says, beyond what was already shared in your application, what do you believe makes you stand out as a strong candidate to the university? So it's really open. It's open to you. If you have a unique experience that you can address in any of the other questions, then use this one and tell us what makes you unique, what makes you stand out. What have you experienced that you feel the university should know about, and that you feel the universities should consider when accepting your application, because it's something that you can bring to the university to make the university a better place. So this question, it's really open for those that can only think of two others within these seven that they can answer. This one gives you the option of being the third one that you can use. So let me talk to you about a little bit about writing tips. So when you get here, don't forget to click on this cross here. And then it gives you some tips. So obviously start early. On the application, there's a 20-minute timeout. So if you last minute, if you decide to turn in the application, if you're writing your responses on the application itself, but then you decide to take a break and you get up and you make yourself a sandwich or something, just know that if you come back, it may time you out and your responses will be lost. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to start early and you want to write it in a Word document. Write in a Word document also because it would be good for you to share with other people so you can get feedback. But once you have it all set and you have your finalized version on your Word document, then just go ahead and cut and paste when you get to this part of the application. You also want to write persuasively. Something that I tell many students is this is not the time for you to be humble, okay? We obviously don't want you to exaggerate things, but don't be too humble. Understand that we have thousands upon thousands of applications that we're reading. We need you to really put, the best of you out there. We don't want you to be shy at this moment. Put yourself out there. Tell us about yourself. Tell us how proud you are of everything that you've accomplished and what you've done. Give us the best light of yourself so that when we make decisions, we know that we got the best responses from students. So write persuasively of what you completed. The other thing that's really key in your responses is it's right here that I'm highlighting. It says write concrete examples. By concrete examples, we want to know what you've done, okay, not just what you think. To give you an idea, going back to the example of political science, if I were to read a response to the first question, about the intended major, and a student says, well, I want to pursue political science because I'm very passionate about politics. I watch the news. I think we should go in this type of political ideology because according to this theory, this political ideology will have this type of impact, and it'll just be better for humanity, et cetera, et cetera. That's just ideas of what you think. It's not giving us concrete examples of what you've done. Concrete example could be like, I want to pursue political science because I want to make an impact in my community. I want to work for my local government, city government. That's where I volunteer. So that's where I volunteer over the summers. That's a concrete example. It's telling us what you've done. And then within that concrete example, you can go into details. What exactly did you do while you were volunteering, those summers, for example? Or if you attended the monthly, the monthly meetings, their board meetings. Why were you there? Was it just to listen? Did you ask questions? Or what political issue is out there that you're really passionate about, and what have you done, to spread that word about that political issue? So those are concrete examples, and those are the details that we want to hear. It really gives us a good picture of who you are. Okay, feel free to use I statements. This is not an essay that you write, say, for example, in English class. Here we do want you to use the I statement of what I've done. Okay. In addition to that, going back to this is not an essay. This is a response. Okay, you're responding to something, so you want to get straight to the point. And again, you're limited to 350 words, so make sure that you're addressing the questions. You don't have to kind of guide us into creating this context, very big, and then finally get to the point towards the end of your response. Don't do that. Okay. If you need to provide some context, that's fine. Some context, but not a whole lot of context. We want to know your response right off the bat. And the next point that I want to make, it kind of goes with proofreading and editing. Something that is very key, and I tell students to ask of the person that they're asking to review their personal essay questions, is to ask them the simple question. Ask them two simple questions. One, do you feel that I answered the question? And then the other question that I want to ask them is, does it make sense? Okay. And it's so simple, just does it make sense? You got to understand that as we're reading them, we don't know you. It's just, a name on paper, and this is a response. So we have to understand what you're saying right away. We have to understand, your points right away. So when you ask somebody, does it make sense? If that's somebody that may know you and it doesn't make sense to them, then it's gonna, be even more difficult for it to make sense to us. So it's a good exercise just to ask them. If it's clear to them, then you can feel a little bit more confident that it's going to be clear to us, and we're going to be able to give you the appropriate score that you deserve. So definitely have people proofread it, and then ask them those two questions. Did I answer the question, and does it make sense? And obviously, you also want people to proofread it just for grammatical and spelling errors. Those are little things that you just want to avoid. That it just makes it for us, the readers, read it easily, understand it right away. And believe me, when we read a response easily, when we understand it right away, when we see that you answer the questions, we give you the better score because it's easier to score when we see that. It's more difficult to score when it's very complex. And speaking of things that are complex, here's another tip. Try not to use metaphors, and try what's the other word? Try not to use metaphors. And just to give you an example, we had one response where the student, I think he was a history major, and he wanted to compare how a watch is kind of like history, and all the complex gadgets in a watch is like all the complex parts that happen in history. Well, the student kept talking about a watch where it got more confusing. I'm even confused right now trying to talk about it. But it just got more confusing. It didn't help. I understand how he wanted to be creative in his response, but things like that don't help. It just makes it more complicated, and it doesn't give you a better score. So, avoid things like that. And then we kind of talked about, solicit feedback. So you definitely want to ask others to read it, and then tell you what they think about it. But just remember, this is your response. We do want to hear your voice. So we do want it to be authentic. We want it to be yours. But at the same time, it's okay to ask feedback. Things like, does it make sense, spelling, grammar, things like that. Just so that you can go back and correct it, so that it's still your voice, but just it's written in a way that it's more comprehensible for the person reading it. And then I did mention to copy and paste. So go ahead and do that. That'll be helpful. And then lastly, relax. And honestly, don't make too much out of this. I think a couple of best things you can do. One, like I mentioned, do that outline of everything you've done after high school and break it down by term. What have you done? Fall of such year, spring of such year. The other thing you should do is just brainstorm and start writing. Just go out there and just look at the prompt, at the question, and just start writing. Just start writing whatever comes to your mind. And then after that, you can start editing. You can start, taking things out. You can start saying, oh, okay, based on this list that I've created of what I've done, I think these are stronger points, with this question, or these are stronger points that go with this question. So just, do those two things, and I think it's going to help you relax and kind of get through this process a little bit easier. And just my last point that I want to reiterate, just understand that this is one part of multiple parts from the admissions process, or the application process. We're going to look at GPA, we're going to look at grades, we're going to look at coursework, we're going to look at other achievements and awards that you've done. So this is just one part. So don't stress yourself too much over it. Just get to it, answer them as best as you can, have people look at it, and then just go ahead and submit it. And I think it's gonna work out in your favor. Just you being here, it's a positive step, because I think these tips are gonna help you, and you'll be able to handle these and not get too stressed out over these personal insight questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. Rebecca, I don't know if you want me to take on questions now, or I can wait at the end if students have questions, after we hear, from our professor from Rio Hondo on tips that they can use.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would be a good time to pause and just let students kind of collect their thoughts for a bit and see if they have any questions before we continue with Michelle.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions at all relating to Ernesto's presentation, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or if you'd like or feel more comfortable, you can definitely ask your question in the chat box.
I have a question regarding, I'm just still kind of confused on question 2 and 3, because they're both kind of similar, because they both talk about being creative and talent. I was just wondering, like, what's like the big difference between both of those two?
Okay. I think with creativity, think of more of the artistic manner. Think of more music, art, theater. You can look at it in that way, because I think that'll really help you separate that from talent or skill. Talent or skill, let's say, for example, you're very good at math and you participated in, different math competitions, or things like, let's say you're very good at engineering and you participated in robotics competitions. Those are talents or skills that you've developed over time. And yes, you can say, well, one can say that too about an artist that's developed their painting skills. But those, I think, if you think about it in those directions, I think you can kind of separate the two. But you're right, they do kind of overlap. But what we found, and the reason why we wrote both, is because students were getting a little bit. It was easier to separate the two, as it made it more understandable for us as readers. when a student was, was talking about something that was more on the artistic, uh, for example, somebody that writes poetry, that could be an artistic way, but developing, writing could also be a skill. So I do understand how they overlap, but think of artistic, like I mentioned, more music, poetry, theater, things like that. And think of talents or skills, something that you've kind of done, like an engineering talent that I mentioned, or if math talent, or skill that you developed, or maybe, for example, here's one. If you work on cars, that would be more of a skill that you've developed, working on cars. But let's say you've gotten creative in how you, because you paint cars, and that would probably be more along the creative side. So I do understand your question. I hope I was able to kind of differentiate the two a little bit there. um, it would be kind of based on what you feel that you've done, but answering in either or, and the way you describe it, I think it's going to help you kind of consider, is it more of a 2 response, or is it more of a 3?
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I kind of wanted to add on to that question on creative.
Okay, go ahead.
What I was gonna say is like my personal experience from like before the pandemic, when my car broke down, and then like I myself like rebuilt it, the whole engine, took it out, and went through the whole 2 weeks of just sitting on working on my car.
Mhm.
And that was what I wanted to do as like a creative.
And you can, let's say that, now, have you continued to work on cars?
Yeah, that's always like I've always been like a car enthusiast, so like anything like into the racing field, anything about building cars. But it's not like my major, but it's just like a hobby that I have.
Okay, but would you say that you've developed that skill or that talent? Do you feel that you have a talent in working with cars?
Yeah.
Okay, so see, this is a good example. If and it also depends on how you're gonna write it. If your general topic, it's in responding, let's say, to number 3, that you do very well working on cars, and then you can use that example about your car breaking down and you rebuilding the whole engine as an example of how you use your talent in terms of working with cars, right? At the same time, just like you mentioned, you could the way you respond to number 2, if you're responding about how you became creative, you can say that, my car broke down and I needed to get creative because I couldn't just buy another engine. I need to think of what can I do to overcome this problem. And as you see there, and things to consider, says what are the steps that you took to solve the problem. So that's when your creativity kicks in, right? And you thought, well, maybe I could rebuild this whole engine. And then you went at it, and maybe you did some research online, and maybe you asked some mechanics of what you can do, and then you took it upon yourself to rebuild the engine, and that's a way on how you got creative. So do you see the difference, on how you can use the same situation, but it could apply to either question?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's a good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of get your insight on where I should maybe direct this experience that I've had.
Okay.
I'm not sure what question I would use.
Oh,
But
I'm sorry. And what experience was that?
so I have.
And let me just stop you for a second. Is this an experience that you want to share in this group, or is this something that
Yeah,
you
no, it's
rather?
okay because I want the feedback and I don't mind. I don't think anyone's gonna hold it against me.
Okay.
So it's just problem. I think it's overcoming the fact that I needed to not get my emotions in the way of how I actually felt with a couple of things. So I think a recent example is how normally I would constantly argue with my family about something, but instead of arguing a few days ago, I just sat down with my family and I was very clear about what I needed to be solved but I was also very polite, and I apologized for the previous ways that I directed myself towards them, being a bit disrespectful and yelling. So would I use that as something that I overcame? Because I also realized that that's something that I started doing as soon as I got out of high school. I started to become more calm, and I wouldn't include my emotions and let anger, overcome me as I used to when I was younger.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think that experience belongs as a response to the number 5 question, to describe the significant challenge that you face, and then the steps that you took, that you have taken to overcome that challenge. I think that would be the appropriate one.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Unless there's any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and give this time over to Michelle, who's going to be going more in depth about writing tips to make, again, the personal insight question more concise and stronger.
Okay, hello everyone. Michelle Velasquez Bean. I'm a professor of English. And let's see if I did this share correctly. You should be seeing my screen here. Let me see if I can pause the share real quick so I can give it to you in a PowerPoint presentation version. Okay, let's see. Share. And I will do this one here. So, when you're in presentation mode, it's a little bit hard to see, because I have a small little laptop screen, to see everyone's pictures. So, Rebecca, if you could help me with that, if anyone wants to chime in. And then I do want to let you know that I would love for you all to engage in a activity in a couple of minutes. So hopefully you have on your computers open or your cell phones open, because it's going to be a little link that I'm going to put in the chat. And then let's see what else we're going to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this little way and techniques and helpful things for writing help called the ABCDs that I've come up with to help you all. And then also, like I said, we're going to do a little activity and a little Padlet. And then hopefully you'll be feel safe enough to engage in some breakout rooms for just a couple minutes. And all of this is super relevant. So feel comfortable, I hope, and don't feel like you have to go and put your videos on, but hopefully you won't log off and you'll engage in this. And the reason why is because it's so important, as your UC rep was talking about, that you start now and start early. So a few little things, the writing help that I have for the personal insight questions, often to me, it's like, you think, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. All these questions, even thinking about them as a whole, right, can be just like sort of overwhelming, even for a professor of English like myself, right? So a full-time English professor at Rio Hondo College. I also work in the Writers Resource Center that we'll talk about at the end. And we're here to help you with from every single step of let's pick which questions you want to address to exactly what you were doing and asking the UC rep questions about your experiences and where they go to which questions. So let's dig in. So the most important thing to me, the advice I could give you is, like I said, start early, and you have to address those prompts. And what I mean by prompts is those actual questions, right? The personal inquiry questions. So once you do that, I mean, I'm old school, so I like to actually print that sheet out. So print out that sheet from that website. There's a PDF version on there. Print it out, and then take your pen, your highlighter, and circle keywords that you're seeing appear in those personal insight questions. That is so important, because you're going to want to make sure that you are realizing you've got to talk about your major. There's keywords like leadership that you're probably going to circle and see that repeat, like creative and creative side that you were talking about in those other questions. Talents or skills you should probably be circling, and educational barriers or challenges. And then beyond your application was one that I saw that, I circled when I did this activity. This is super key that you do this today, students. Please just even addressing those questions and circling and having that conversation and writing that annotation of it is going to help you start that drafting process. It's going to make it a little bit easier when you get to, you know, having to hit submit. Because if we try to do it at the last minute, and I know how you are, I'm like this too. I mean, maybe you're not, maybe it's just me, where we procrastinate, right? And we wait till the last minute to do things, and that could work. But can you imagine how much better it will be if you do it ahead of time and you have plenty of time to actually fully address and not like, you know, often we feel like this great, at least I do. I feel like this great elation, this euphoria that, yes, I did all this and I accomplished it in a couple hours and there you go. But I'm telling you, it feels so much better when you do that, you do it early and then you polish it to be like amazing. So give yourself time, start today. And that just means not the whole thing. You could just like be circling your keywords, and that is the A. So the ABCDs, the A is address these prompts, start early. And then brainstorm. We've been hearing this word. I put little bubbles there, but you can do lists like our rep was talking about. You can do columns. You can do any kind of way that you just start actually engaging and writing some things down. But we're going to do a little activity in a second. Well, we'll do one writing and then we'll do one talking. Because to me, the most important thing is that if you think back, how did we learn our first language? We engaged in talking, right? So that talking with each other is so valuable, and that helps in the brainstorming process. But think about, I mean, we all have, as transfer, we're all gonna have to write on the question about your major. So, you know, write down your major and then start thinking just anything and everything that comes to your mind. You know, what do you remember about a person in that major? Did anyone get you engaged? Was there an experience that you had that really pushed you to that major? Or maybe it was a set of courses or a class or a professor or something you enjoy about that major, or a person you remember in learning in the curriculum and activity, all kinds of things. Just sort of just write it all out and get it all out on there. That's the idea of just starting, right? Just start so that you can later eliminate or focus in on something. So another question, right? This is for those other questions. You have to write on that one major one, but then the other question would be, okay, what do I enjoy? Like, so we have all those really detailed questions, but you got to start big, right? You got to think, okay, so who am I? Like, you know, think about what makes you you. And then what do you enjoy? What are your passions? What led you to that? What experience kind of engaged you and motivated you and put a fire under you for that? Those things that you love. All of your passions, just start brainstorming them out and writing them down. And then what that'll do is that when you do engage with someone else, you already have a bunch of things that you can sort of like run by them and say, you know, this is about me. And then you, just like what you did with the UC rep right now, you can then run it by them because you've already kind of thought about it, and then they can help you shape. That's how we learn, right? In conversation, help shape which question and how to go about it. And the biggest thing is when you're brainstorming and you're starting to write all these things down, you want to remember that, and I love that part of the video where one person on that video, hopefully you were on the call with that UC video that our rep showed us, is that there's that elevator pitch, right? So if you were gonna meet someone and tell them who you are quickly, what would you be sharing about your lived experience and your passions? That, and you have to think about it as what's not on the app in terms of your grades and the courses and things. So what makes you you is so valuable. That's where the answers should come out in these questions, right? So the most important thing, addressing all of those parts of the prompt will then help once you've got a bunch of ideas down. And then once you're talking to someone else about it, like a writer center instructor, we can help you shape those to make sure you address all those parts of the prompt or the personal inquiry questions, right? So let's see. I think I have, okay, so let's do this little activity. I'm gonna put in the chat. This is a little Padlet. And let me put this here so that you can open this if you have that capability to click on that link. And it should open up to a Padlet, and in the bottom right corner, there is a circle with a plus in it that's pink. And then once you click that, a box will open where you can actually type in your passions, what makes you you, your talent, anything you think of quickly. And then when you see other people starting to post those in, then go ahead and click the heart button that you like that passion that they put up. And you don't have to put your name if you don't want to, but sort of just brainstorm a bunch of cool things about yourself. Like my day, we said cool, and cool meant like, you know, anything really great about you, anything that you feel comfortable to share that are your passions, your talents, really cool things about you. So put that in the Padlet, and then I will go there right now and share that screen. So take a minute to do that. Cool. And don't forget to click on like maybe 2 or 3 that you really, really like. I love it. So we've got some creative writers, high five, Sarah. We've got some programmers, some playing guitar, car enthusiasts. Oh, I love this one, helping others. What a culturally relevant superpower. I love that. Let's see, we've got reading. Ooh, I wonder what you're reading. Right now, I'm decolonizing my reading, and I'm reading a whole bunch of things. Like, let me show you. So I'm reading a whole bunch of cool things like How to Be an Anti-Racist and Stamp from the Beginning, and White Fragility, Reclaiming the Roots of Curriculum, that's a teacher thing, Culturally Responsiveness and Teaching, so you want to talk about race. So that's, I love that one. That's like a really cool one. Reading and oh, I love this, Solving Problems, Digital Art. Oh, I love this. I'm an English teacher, so anyone who loves calculus and math, yay. I love it. All right, so we'll do like another like 30 seconds for you to list down all of your, as many talents. You could just put as many up there as you want. You don't have to put your names, but put anything of your passions and talents that say who you are. And then don't forget to click on the hearts of those that you really love. Like I love this skating because that is totally my era. Roller skates. Ooh, road tripping. Ooh, yes. Digital art. I love this. Beach right now is the place to go, right? I don't know, I can't like heart that one, but I'm trying to heart that one. All right, so take another like 10 seconds. And then we'll go back in a second to the other PowerPoint. All right, so thank you for that. High five from far, thank you. And so what you would want to do now is going from those ideas of sharing whom you are and your passions and what you enjoy. And you can see that so many people were engaged in wanting to hear more about it. That's what those hearts, that's why I had to do the hearts. So when you think about the next step, right? So if we're brainstorming, getting all these things out, having conversations with others, this is the C, converse, actually talk to someone else about what you're thinking for writing for some of these courses and some of your passions and talents. Share with them so that you can choose which ones would be engaging. Because just like our rep was saying, when someone else finds those activities and that part of you, because we all have brilliant, beautiful lived experiences that show the diversity and our authentic voices, right? But sometimes we just need to bounce them off. So when you do that in person, like talking out with someone, or even if you're texting, whatever, what do you think about this? Or coming to the WRC and asking us, you know, to bounce it off with us, or the transfer center, whoever you're going to, then you get to start to narrow down to choose what you're gonna, you know, for lack of a better word, pitch, right, on those personal inquiry questions, so that you can then present a picture of whom you are. beyond just the courses that you've taken, right? And that's really, I'm imagining, and I'm sure that our UC rep can chime in here if this isn't exactly true, but imagine when they're reading, they want to be able to see that, yes, you're creative and you have these passions and that you're going to really engage in your major when you transfer, but they also want to see this holistic picture of you that's going to be an amazing global citizen that's going to contribute to their campus, right? That you have these passions that you're going to continue. And so how do we convey that is super, super important. And that's why you want to talk it out that, you know, if A was address a prompt and start, you know, looking at it early, B is brainstorm, C is converse with someone about this, and then choose what you think will really give that big global picture of whom you are. And that is going to help convey your authentic voice, which is what they're looking for, right? Just you set yourself apart from some of the other apps. I know that sounds terrible, but that's the way that this you know, process will go, right? They want to make sure that you're saying whom you are. That's a little different from what they see on other parts of the prompt, of the application. Okay, so let's go then to the next activity. Oh, yeah. So then once you talk to someone, so then the first one is already going to be your major, right? But then once you talk to someone, they'll probably say, hey, I really like when you shared that experience about you being creative with your car. And the little bit I do know about Brian, he was in one of my classes, I hope that I can share this, is that he did actually say that he, you know, works as a job as well, right? And so then you can say that would be a good experience for, you know, that question. And then, you know, another question could be this person that you remember that helped you with a leadership experience, or this particular, you know, activity, right? So those are the things I mean by choosing. Okay. So let's do a little bit of a breakout room. And Rebecca, I'm going to ask if you can help me with this. And this will only be like there for 2 minutes. You can share your video if you want. You don't have to. Introduce. We'll have groups of 3. So I think that should be about 5 breakout rooms, Rebecca. And then say your name, say your major, what's great about you, and what brings you joy. And it could be those things that you put on the Padlet. But share, and then that way you can start engaging. And this is the first step in doing what you need to do for the prompt. So if we can do that, that would be awesome, Rebecca. And then Rebecca, can you put, I'm gonna put in the chat the 3 questions that they have to answer. Can you put this to the whole breakout?
For sure, I'll go ahead and do that.
Okay, thanks. So you know how, you know, when you put it in from you as a host, it goes to every breakout room.
Right.
Thanks.
Sorry, I think you're muted.
My bad. I was saying, can you, on the main thingy, say 2 more minutes? and then we'll give them a long 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Nicholas. I think Rebecca, he accidentally left the meeting.
Right. He keeps losing connection.
Oh.
But he just joined the breakout room that I assigned him.
Okay, super cool. Okay, and then after this, I have them come back. I'm just looking at the next thing I have. I have them come back, and then I just tell them about what's the UC rep's name? Did he leave already?
No, he's in breakout room 1. His name is Ernesto.
Okay. Ernesto. I couldn't remember his name, and I kept saying UC rep. It's so embarrassing.
No worries.
Okay, UC rep Ernesto. Okay. Okay. And then what time do we have till like with the students? What time does this end?
So on our flyer, it ends until 3. So we
Oh.
Time. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, because I just have like I'm gonna bring them back and talk about detail. Like everything he said is like pretty much like what I have on my PowerPoint. So I'm gonna talk about like detail to determine your authentic voice and how and what that means, and then just go over the how to edit and what you need to do in WRC. So I think maybe like 5-ish, 10 minutes and questions after that, if that's cool.
Perfect.
Okay. So tell them 1 more minute. You think that's enough time? How many minutes did we give them? I mean, I don't remember when we sent them to breakout rooms. Does it show when you sent them?
Yeah, I think a minute is sufficient.
Yeah, just say it in the thingy. Say 1 more minute, but then make it a really long minute before you bring them back.
For sure.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, because for some reason it didn't show breakout rooms. Now it does, but then when I go there, it only gives me into one breakout room.
Got it.
It's the one I'm assigned to.
It's no problem at all.
Cool. Thank you. Will you bring Ernesto back really quick so I can make sure I'm on the right track? Will you bring him back into the main room so I can talk to him before everybody else?
See if I can.
If not, no worries.
Yeah, no, it's not letting me.
Okay. Then we can bring them back. Did you think that was enough time for just saying who they are?
I think so.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Hi, Nicholas, Sarah, Carlos.
Sorry about that, Professor.
No, you're perfect.
Hello.
I know, like yesterday, I was literally leading a meeting with the chancellor's office people, and mid, sentence, the internet in my house went out. So I know how that goes. So far, so good, Ernesto. We're like the same track, I hope. All right, we're just waiting for everybody to come back into the room.
Sorry, Michelle, I didn't know I was on mute, but yeah, everything's good. We're on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let me know if like I am, needing to adjust something that I'm saying. Oh, I figured out how to make you guys my screen bigger. Hopefully, though, that doesn't put a shadow over the slide. All right, so thank you all. High five to you from far, because I know how hard that is. Like to go into like, even if your video is not on, to like introduce yourself. I don't know if you're like this, but I get super nervous even with like my colleagues, like the teacher friends, when we have to do like say who you are introductions, my heart starts racing and stuff like that. So I totally like give you props and say kudos to you. Thank you for doing that. But it's really important. It's really, really important that you start talking it out. Remember we said the ABCDs, right? Like attacking it, addressing those prompts and starting to talk it out early is going to help you shape. It's like sort of that first way that you can do a brainstorming. So hopefully you got some ideas from your peers in the small groups about what sounds really cool and interesting about you. And so let's see if I can go to the next slide. So when you do that, the last thing that I say would be to the D's, right? So A is address the prompt, attack it early, start circling those words so that you can see what the questions are. B is the brainstorm. C is the converse with someone and choose which questions you want to do. And then the D is add that detail that determines your authentic voice. And that's so our UC rep was talking about that earlier. And so as an English teacher, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what that means, because you're like, what does that mean, Miss Dean? How do I do that, right? So what that means is like, you know, the events, right? You just talked about with your peers in the breakout, hopefully even just briefly, about some of the things that you remember, some of the things that are cool, why you started your major, some people that you remember that influenced you, some of your leadership that you've done at Rio Hondo, or even in your community, right, in the last few years. So those are the things in orange, right? Those are the events that you remember. And I should have probably put, instead of in the middle event, I should have put, you know, cool thing about you. Okay, so now how do I make that so that your personality, because when we say authentic voice in writing, that's sort of like your writing personality. So it has an element of who you are as a person, as a being, but it also shows the sophistication in your writing style that as, you know, readers are going to, remember Ernesto was saying, you know, when it reads well, it makes our job easier. Is that fair to say, Ernesto? Is that kind of like what you're saying, right? And so what that means in like teacher speak is, yes, the grammar has to be perfect, but so are they also looking for you to convey who you are, like your essence, your lived experience, and your personality through your writing. That's really difficult to do, and it takes a level of sophistication, basically a lot of writing, this type of writing. And really, to be honest, often we don't help you or give you a lot of practice doing this when you're doing your work, because most of the time in your other classes, we're giving you like write labs or write you know, history papers or article reviews or, you know, play reviews, or even, you know, in your English classes, argument papers, right? So there's slightly different modes of writing. So this is like something, so in other words, I'm telling you, if you're not exactly sure how to write this, no prob, because guess what? Da-da-da, English teachers are here to help you. So this is where you then make an appointment in the WRC, and to remember that, okay, I've got these ideas, just like what you did with Ernesto, the UC rep right now earlier, when you're asking questions about certain experiences and where do they fit. We can then converse it out with you so that you can then create these events to fit the prompt, one, but also to convey your authentic voice and your personality. And then we can help you with that level of sophistication so that it's fluid, that it reads nicely, and then does all that all at the same time. That's really complex, right? So what that means then is, once you have those events down there, like brainstormed, and then you've talked it out with someone they say, yeah, that sounds really cool, you should write about that. Now with the D is, okay, think about the detail, the vivid, remember Ernesto was kind of talking about this, or was it in the video? One of, or both, right? Concrete nouns, concrete detail, like in other words, not like, my teacher the other day told me that I should go into physics and calculus. That's okay, but then to show your writing prowess, and then also to show your lived experience in your voice, it would be super cool to add some concrete details and some vivid adjectives, and we'll talk about motif in a second, and details that say something closer to, after experiencing the microaggressions of a woman in STEM, Dr. Spieler encouraged me to pursue my passions for math by advancing in calculus, and thus the reason why I am an entrepreneur. engineer major. So now all of a sudden the readers are like, ooh. So do you see the difference? Said the same thing, but one was like, okay, like, oh, I wanted to take calculus because I'm really good at it. That's okay. There's nothing grammatically incorrect about that. But then once you've had the details, the concrete nouns, and you don't have to put names. I probably shouldn't have used specific teacher names because that's probably not the best thing to do, but you could say my MESA coordinator teacher, right? And things like that. Those then, when you're writing the level of sophistication that way, then it's going to, and this is this top one up here, this thing like a motif. This then, your readers will start to see these sort of, you might know them sort of kind of like themes, but that's like more in literature, right? But this motif is whom you are as a person that's like being echoed throughout the responses. So you're going to have different responses, right? And different events and activities to answer the prompt clearly, whichever the three that you pick besides your major, right? But you also want to convey whom you are, and that's where those motifs comes in, and that's where the voice comes in. That's how you're writing it, what words you're choosing, what details you're putting in there. That's gonna say, ooh, okay, Sarah, yes, this woman is strong. She wants to pursue, you know, this is kind of like that picture they're getting. Or, you know, Carlos, yes, Carlos Mora, like he really wants to engage in this, and we can see this running throughout his answers, right? So that's the kind of thing that we can help you with as instructors, or I encourage you to find someone in your life that you feel safe, that you trust, that can then actually help you with that. To like say, okay, this is what I want to say, but I also want to convey that I'm this kind of person with this lived experience to convey this about whom I am. So that's what I mean by determine your voice. So this would be like a good question, a good time, like if anybody has any questions on this particular element that I'm talking about with detail on voice, because that is a little bit of a difficult thing to wrap our heads around sometimes. Does anybody have any questions on this? I love it. You can put it in the chat too. Okay, so now address the prompt early, circle those words so you know what they're all asking, brainstorm it out, have a conversation and choose which ones you're gonna address. Then the E, right? Oh, well, the D was detect the errors and determine your voice. The E is edit, edit, edit. So again, start early, but here's a hot tip. Start early enough that you could take a little break from it, a day. Then when you go back to what you've written, you're gonna start to see more of those errors, and you're gonna start to see the lack of fluidity if that's one of the areas that you need to address, right? So sometimes that's why I'm saying, remember at the top of this, I said, look, you want to start now so you have plenty of time, because it is great, that great feeling of euphoria when we get it all done. But when you go back, sometimes when you're writing in the moment, you don't always see the errors or the lack of fluidity. The other thing I encourage you to do is read it out loud. And I think Ernesto, the UC rep, was talking about this as well. Read it out loud, like literally read it out loud. Like, you know, get the paper and you say, you know, join from the PC, Macintosh, iOS, Android for the meeting. You have to actually read it out loud so that you can like hear if there's anything that's sort of like stilted, you know, in the structure, right? And one other thing that I learned from a student, which was awesome, is that Microsoft Word has where it'll read it to you in the diction at the top, there's a little button. So definitely do that too, because when a computer reads it back to you, you'll start to hear some of the grammar errors and some of the fluidity structures. So that's a really good technique. And if you can't find that, it's usually, it's not always in the toolbar at the top of Microsoft Word. So just go into the toolbar and add that, the reading out loud diction button. And then the other thing is like, just make sure that you get someone that's really, really strong in grammar, punctuation, and mechanics. so that they can help you find errors if that's not your thing. Because, you know, like I have a son that's an aerospace engineer that's severely dyslexic, and he just sometimes wouldn't see how he flips words. So he then, because he's brilliant, he literally is an aerospace engineer working on a rocket. So it's nothing about the intellect, it's just the way his brain works. So if you aren't good at it, like maybe my son wasn't that great, he would come to me, Mom, you see these errors and I don't. So this is where I say, like, get help, right? The most important thing is to ask for help. And I know that's scary and it's hard, but right now in COVID, you guys rock. You're doing it, right? You are amazing with your remote learning. And then now you have the capability of doing like WRC appointments through Zoom. So you can make an appointment with me or one of the other professors in the Writers Resource Center to get help, and then not even have to leave your house, which is kind of cool. I hope you think that's cool. So that's the E, right? Edit, 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 polish, 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 and get help doing that. Let's see, what's my next one? Okay, so here's the information about the WRC that I keep talking about. So it's a really easy URL. You can type that in right now and you'll see this page when it comes up, www.riohondo.edu/WRC, which stands for Writers Resource Center. And what's cool is we have two learning assistant centers, learning center assistants that are available for you right here. Is their Google that you could text them, their Google cell, or you can email them, or they even have where you can go ahead and live Zoom them like immediately between these hours, Monday to Thursday, and then a half a day on Friday. So they will then connect you with someone either in the LAC, which are tutors, or in the WRC. So if you want professor, like you could ask for that crazy Mrs. Bean, then you ask them, say, can I have an appointment with Mrs. Bean? I'm only working on Wednesday evenings, but in the WRC, but there's a lot of instructors that will be able to help you if you want an actual English teacher to help you with your statements. Okay, any questions on the WRC or any of the help that Rio Hondo has available for you? Okay. Well, you know what? Before I change the slide, you should probably take a picture of it with your phone, like your cell phone, like screenshot it. The URL is there too, but sometimes I like having it right here on my phone just so I can see it real easy. And then, I know I like talk a mile a minute, so tell me if I went too fast or if you have any other questions, concerns, things that you want to ask me about in terms of grammar, structure, how to get that authentic voice. And then chime in, Ernesto, if there was anything that's a little off or I'm a little crazy on.
No, I thought it was good. Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, I think it was brought up last time. Think of the audience that you're writing to. So who's the audience? And the audience are people like me. So they at least have their bachelor's. Some have their master's. Not all of them are English majors. So in a way, that could work for you because you could impress us with your writing. But look at the people that you're writing to, and then hopefully that helps you, give you an idea of how to write that.
Yeah, that's definitely, thank you, Ernesto, for that too, because I do want to say that even though like I'm an English teacher on here trying to help, remember I said there's a different little bit of a modality, and I'm assuming this is correct, Ernesto. You don't want to necessarily write a piece of creative piece in terms of like it's a poem or a short story. That's not what the readers are looking for. They're not looking for you to show your creativity in your writing prowess. Like I don't know if it was Sarah, someone else was saying, oh, they love creative writing. You then don't need to write a creative writing piece. You need to explain how that's your passion and led your major, or that's your passion and that you published and that's how you're a leader. So that's the nuanced difference of how to write these statement answers so that someone else understands who you are. Remember, it's like painting that picture of whom you are that they cannot get from a list of courses.
That's exactly correct, Michelle. Yes, don't get creative with your writing, but as Michelle expressed, tell us about how you write creatively.
Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do. Like I said, we don't necessarily always give you that type of, and then think about, it's almost like you're trying to sell yourself, right? Like, this is who I am, but without it sounding too like arrogant. So that's where that element of the word choices and how you express it and what details you put that creates then that voice rather than like, super ego or something like that. All right, so no other questions?
All right.
Everybody's shy, Rebecca.
Feel free to ask your questions in the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. We can answer it through the chat as well.
Wait, can I ask you all, because I'm a teacher, so I cannot leave without making sure that I check on you. So either with your videos off and a thumbs up on your video, you don't have to, or in the reactions at the bottom of the screen, there's a little face with a little plus, and if you click that, give me a thumbs up if you remember what the ABCDEs of writing for the PIQs means. Give me a thumbs up if you remember. I love it. Carlos, Nicholas, Sarah, Brian, thank you. Lisette, Pauline, thank you. Sai Jimenez. I'm waiting for Dylan and Lisette. Did you guys go away from your computers? Any volunteer to remember the very first thing you need to do today? So we'll help out Lisette and Dylan.
Today, the first thing we have to print out and we have to circle some key things. That's all I remember.
Yes, you remember, Dylan, that's the A, right? Address the prompts, look at them, highlight them, engage with them. Then the B, does anybody remember the B?
Brainstorm.
Thank you, Brian. Brainstorm, start writing it out, like answers, because you're gonna have a ton of answers and then you're gonna have to narrow. So that's the C. What's the C for?
Conversing and choosing.
Thank you, Nicholas. High five from far. You're going to converse with someone about all of those things you brainstormed and choose the ones that best fit you talking about yourself and providing your lived experience and authentic voice. And then the D we didn't spend a lot of time on. Does anybody remember the D?
Add detail and
oh, you do remember. Thank you, Carlos. Was that you? The add detail. This is what's going to show your sophistication and your lived experience on the words that you choose and how you set that up. Thank you, Carlos. And then the E is what?
Edit.
Edit, edit, edit. And have plenty of time. Thank you, Brian. Have plenty of time. This is why starting today, even just circling and thinking about those. And I appreciate you. I send you lots and lots of positive energy and love, dear students, because I know how like scary that could be, like going off into a breakout room when it's not even your class and this crazy beans having you do that. So thank you, thank you. Lots of love for doing that. And I know we have like till 3:30. I mean, I can hang out, but I don't want to keep you. What's next, Rebecca? And thank you all. Thank you, thank you.
Right, yeah, so unless there's any other questions, or again, if you feel more comfortable waiting for everyone else to leave and you can stay behind and ask Ernesto and Michelle some questions. We have until 3, but hey, I mean, it's always a plus to end early, right? That gives us some space for anything else that we want to take care of. I understand. But again, I just want to take this time to thank Michelle and Ernesto. Just a reminder, this workshop isn't the only resource you have to get assistance with your PIQ. Ernesto has one-on-one meetings available for all of you. You can call the transfer center and we can schedule that for you. We have other UC representatives who offer the same assistance. So whether it's with Ernesto at UCR, or you want to speak with someone from UCLA or UC Santa Barbara, what have you, we can schedule those one-on-ones with you, and you can have a more direct personal conversation about your personal insight questions, maybe even have it read and get some feedback. We have our English instructors like Michelle Bean, who you can also turn to as a resource and get some feedback. We have the Writing Resource Center at Rio Hondo College that you can tap into. And you have us at the Transfer Center. We're more than happy to take a look at your personal insight question as well, whether it's one of us, the student services assistants, or a transfer counselor. So there is a multitude of resources that you can tap into to get as much feedback and perspectives on your personal insight question. I see that Michelle just included the link to the Writing Resource Center. Thank you for that. So please check that out. You can book an appointment to share and have your personal insight question reviewed. So again, if you have any questions left or would like to, wait for everyone else to leave so that you can have a more one-on-one interaction, feel free to do so. But other than that, this concludes our workshop. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.
Brian was my legacy mentor last year, which is a great thing to put, Brian, on your one of your questions. Ernesto, a legacy is our program for Latino males. And so they get one-on-one mentoring, and then we do activities as a community as well as a familia, and leadership opportunities and scholarship funds. So it's a competitive process. So
oh, nice, yeah.
That's how I know him a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's a really great thing, Brian, to put. I would write Ernesto to put
Yes,
legacy scholar on there, because it is
Yes.
a competitive process to get that. And then it shows leadership skills, and especially since he's been in it since the inaugural class a year and a half ago.
Okay.
Oh, I could have said that too to the students. Like often, right, when you see that they've done the leadership consistently is
that's a plus. Yeah.
is a plus. That it's not just a one-off. I did Autism Speaks as a rally once. No, but if you do Autism Speaks and you're a captain of it for 5 years, 6 years.
Right. Yeah. No, that is definitely a good example to include. And you, just as you mentioned, so the name of it, like, yes, I didn't know, but then you explain what it is. We're definitely going to need that, right, in the writing, because, yeah, a lot of community colleges have different programs, and we don't know them all. So, just a brief explanation of what it is and what it does, and then, your involvement within it. Yeah, that's definitely strong.
And that's a nuanced skill as well, to be able to say what the program is and the response not be about the program, but about how you are in the program and what that's created for you in giving your personality, your voice, your passion, right? That's hard to do too. Yeah. And so often in like the WRC, that's usually what we do is we go, well, wait, like often when they do the challenge question or barrier, educational barrier, students will say, the whole story, I should have probably said this, there's so much we could talk about, the whole story, right? But then it ends up being more about their, grandma and not a lot about them, right? Right. So it's very difficult. So those of you who are still on the line, make sure that it's not that you want to dismiss that, but that's where I'm saying the brainstorm and the conversing with someone actually helps, because you can get all that out and then kind of be okay with letting it go for your 350 max. Because if you spend so much time thinking about details that aren't really truly about you, because you could still say that in a shorter, like 1 or 2 sentences max, so that you can be more about you, right? And so that's...
Yeah, you're right. And thank you for bringing that up, because we do see that. And that's why we try to emphasize it's personal insight questions. And that's why we point out it's about it's about you. So even though, if let's say your grandma had a very tough experience, that's about her. That's her experience. And I know it affects you in some way, but you're going to have to, like Michelle said, you're going to have to narrow down her experience and talk about more about your reaction to it or how it's affected you and what you've done after that.
Yeah. It's hard though. When you talk
Yeah,
about you want to hold on to everything, right? That's why I'm saying the detail. Those are Dylan and Carlos and Sarah that you guys are still on the line, and Nicholas. That's why you want to brainstorm and write all those details out, because it helps like get it out so that, like I said, you could kind of, not that it's not part of you, but it did shape who you are now. And it should be like that Padlet. What makes you you, and not, you know, the whole history of your familia or anything like that, because it's not that those aren't valid. It's just that that made you you.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, let us help you if you need help in the WRC with that. But Nicholas, Carlos, Sarah, Dylan, do you guys have any specific questions before we log off? I want to make sure that if you have anything in particular.
Yeah, I think that I was just wondering, since you guys both are, working at Rio Hondo, what are other ways to make myself stand out despite the fact that we're in Corona right now?
That's a good question. So if you, like, are you saying, Dylan, like that you haven't been involved in like outside of class activities at Rio Hondo?
I haven't. I'm only in Legacy. I think that's it. Oh, I'm in Legacy. I'm in this other thing. I think EOPNS, but I don't think I'm in anything where it's like community value.
I'm so glad that you're talking, Dylan, because those two are huge. See, this is why the conversing is so helpful, because Legacy and EOPS, you could probably answer like all your questions based on your experiences through that. And it doesn't mean just saying you're in Legacy or just saying that you're in EOPS. It's the experience. That's why you brainstorm and put all those details. Who influenced you? What activities influenced you? Because you could do like a Legacy mentor activity that you remember with your mentor, and talk about how that opened your eyes to give you self-awareness of, I don't know, whatever. Like for me, working with Brian, he's not on the line anymore, but he's usually okay with me talking about him. But like working with Brian, I was more open to, because he's very good about asking for help, but he opened my eyes to, see, this is deep, right? But I'll just tell you so we can get to the answer real quick. I was like a total Mexicana mom. Like I wanted to feed him. I kept saying like, let's go to lunch here. And we'd go to lunch and I'd be like, why didn't you eat? And he's like, I already ate. So what we had to get to, from me being his mentor and his mentee, is that he had to communicate with me that, Miss Bean, I don't need you to feed me. Like I need you to do an activity with me. So then we started going go-kart racing. We planned to go skydiving, but then COVID hit, right? So in other words, Dylan, like an activity like that, like from the mentor, it was like me bringing the self-awareness that the shifting of the relationship wasn't that mom sort of, thing. So on his end, I don't know how he'd explain it, but in other words, like with the mentor program, you can have an experience where you could even talk about, it helped me to engage in how to communicate with an adult to assert my needs, which gave me growth and maturity or something like that. Like, what do you think, Ernesto? Like going along that kind of line.
No, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's a good way to go about it. And, Dylan, and I mentioned this earlier, I try to mention it a lot. Don't sell yourself short. You just mentioned it. I only have done these two things. But as Michelle mentioned, those are very, very important things. Those are not just only things, right? They're significant, especially if you've been involved with them, over multiple terms. And that's where I go into, break it down by terms. And really what I'm trying to have you do is to really think deeply of the whole time that you've had within those programs, because I'm sure you've done a lot. Right now, they just may come up to your mind as just the names of these programs. But believe me, if you go through every month or every term, you'll find out, wow, we actually did a lot. And within all those things that you did, that's when you start thinking, okay, out of everything that I've done within this program, this matches this question better. So I'm going to be addressing this question with this experience. And I think that's going to help you. Don't cut yourself short, even though we're in COVID. And I have a feeling a lot of people may write about COVID, but that's still very broad. Even within COVID, people are getting creative on what they're doing, since they're stuck at home, whether they're learning something new or whether, they decided to, I don't know, they decided on a goal and they're trying to reach it using their time at home wisely. For example, I don't know, learning a new instrument or something like that. So it's a matter of sitting down and really going over everything that's happened, and then from there, I think you're going to be able to align what best addresses which prompt. And again, think about it not just right now. This is stuff that you've done post high school. So if you've been out of high school, 2 years, that's 2 years full of stuff. So just go through them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dylan, for sharing. And definitely make an appointment to see one of us in the WRC, and we'll talk it out with you so that we can help you shape some of those ideas.
Yeah.
Because you are, I can tell already just a little bit, I've met you, you're a beautiful soul person and you've done a lot. And so sometimes it's that C, right? That conversing with someone to kind of shape it. How about you, Nicholas? Do you have any questions?
I do actually.
Okay.
So I'm in the honors program here at Rio, and without even realizing it, this workshop actually counted towards one of the requirements, which is to attend a workshop each semester. But since COVID and everything's online distance education, I don't think I can't get a signature like as I normally would. Do you know how I'd go about this? Is there an attendance that was taken today, by any chance? Or something I can verify?
Oscar, did Rebecca take attendance?
No, but I can definitely let David know, and I'll CC you on there, and I could just let him know that you were at the workshop.
Yes,
so.
I conferenced with my previous Puente counselor, but I still have yet to meet with David, and I am planning to do so soon.
Got it. If you want to send me like a message in the chat, like privately with like your student number and full name, and then that way, I'll CC you in that email, and I'll let David know.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think you can go on the actual website on the honors transfer program, and at the bottom it says workshop verification, and I think you have to do that. Because I talked with David yesterday, and he told me to if I had to go to workshop to do that, that's like the way to verify, and that's like kind of the only way.
Okay.
So even stuff like that, Carlos. Thank you, Carlos. Carlos and Nicholas, even how you're navigating the honor system, that in itself could be a bit of a story that you're telling with the educational barriers, right? Like here you are in a wonderful program, but then because COVID, so we're going to talk about COVID is what I'm saying, like Anessa was saying, how can you shape the COVID instead of doing the violin, oh, we're in COVID, not that I'm dismissing that, but you don't want it to sound like the woe is me when you're writing, right? So then you could say in COVID, being an honors student, having academic agency, having some social agency, it is still even a barrier in this pandemic because we've had, and then you explain what you just explained to us, Nicholas and Carlos, right? That I've had to navigate, but knowing where to go for help. And then you just talk about that aspect of it, so even though you don't want to use maybe the word mature, but that's the academic agency, right? It's that showing that level of maturity and how you're navigating a system that isn't always easy to navigate is showing then your growth and your leadership and your agency that you have engaged in. I know I would love to read about that. I don't know about you, Ernesto, but I think that would show a really great part of you.
Yeah, and to add to that, you can also tie it into how you feel you can transfer that or this experience to the university, where you, even though it's a larger space, you'll be able to navigate the university because you've learned that while your time at Rio Hondo.
I actually also had a second question similar to Dylan's in the sense that I have a couple of things, a couple of points of interest, and I have material and substance to talk about in my questions, but I guess partially to an extent, if you're going to tell a story that gets to the heart of answering the question, I feel like in some cases where I want to take some of my responses or some of these ideas that I'm spitballing in my mind, they kind of don't finish as strong as I wanted to, because one thing I wanted to do in preparation for gaining substance to my character and material to put towards a UC application or any application is I wanted to intern for with city governments, as just to get experience both for the application, but also just for myself. And so actually I was able to get a couple of cards, but that was all pre-COVID. And now since that's happened, if I wanted to communicate in such a way that these opportunities are still present in my life and I could still reach out, how do you, in your guys' experience, how do you guys think the best way to address that would be?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, Nicholas, when you're saying that is goals. That you are planning and you're goal driven and that you're self-motivated and you didn't let a pandemic stop you, even if it's right now on pause to meet the in person with those internships, that you haven't let that stop you. That's how I would frame that, but maybe Ernesto has another way, like that you frame that answer in, you know, that you're highly self-motivated and goal-oriented, and then we can fit it into, usually what I do when there's one-on-one, I don't know if you agree with this, Ernesto, but when there's one-on-one and you've told me all you, like I do what you did in the breakout rooms. I say, tell me a little bit about yourself, and then you tell me about your passions, your joys, what brings you joy. And then I'm able to kind of get a picture of where we can lean your questions towards. So like with that one, if you're saying about goals in the internship, I probably would ask you then about your major and why you did that major, and then like probably shift it maybe to that question, or maybe then I would say, what are some challenges? And so in other words, like there needs to be some more conversation so that we could kind of shift it to which one it will go in, so that we could add that extra detail that's going to give you an authentic picture of yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I agree with Michelle. There's need to be a little bit more detail, because I was even thinking, you know, were you getting creative during COVID and how you were reaching out to these folks? So it could be related to different questions, but in order to really assign it to one, we need a little bit more detail about your experience. So you may, you know, have to, you know, visit the writing center and, you know, go ahead and, you know, kind of share a little bit more of what's been going on, including what is your ultimate outcome that you want. Is it an internship or is it beyond that? So you kind of want to, you know, share that information, and based on that, I think you'll be able to align it with the appropriate question.
Yeah, I agree,
All right,
Ernesto. Yeah.
Because
also,
at the moment that
yeah.
would stand as a, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, go ahead.
But as it stands, that's just it's not, let's see, is the word indicative? It doesn't sign a strong enough indicator of something that I've set forth already. I've not ventured deep enough to go ahead and add that as a significant enough factor. I mean, it's a good detail, yes, but it's not enough on its own, huh? And I wasn't planning on it.
Well, it could be, is what Ernesto and I are saying. It's just that we need to talk a little bit more on how we can shape it, because you don't want it to be a negative. Like, you don't want it to be like, dang, pandemic hit, and I had all these goals and then it stopped. Because then it's the sob story, then it's the violins, right? And so, so instead I probably need to drill in a little bit more with you to ask you, like what Ernesto's saying, like what did you do, or what was an end result, or what you planning to get to? That's why I'm saying more goals or plan kind of oriented. So if we have that combo, then I can help you shape it a little bit, because it could be, I'm not saying dismiss it, especially if you're thinking about that. Write it down, Nicholas, before you forget, like pencil it down on a brainstorm sheet. And then that's why it's important to start early, because you have all these ideas that what if something else comes, shapes up a little bit more to a question than that one. I don't know yet.
And you know, Nicholas, if I can just add, I mean, November's not here yet, and I know it will be here soon. But my understanding is you attended, you know, some of these events from your city, and you were able to get some business cards, and it kind of stopped there, it sounds like. But you know what? Have you reached out to them? And if you have, what's the next step? You know, are you reaching out to them to get an internship? Have they offered an internship? If so, when will you start? If you can kind of, you know, continue what you're doing, and you know, in saying in 2 weeks or so, you've landed something. Now you have an internship. Now you're ending strong. You're no longer ending, you know, ending weak, if that's what you want to call it. So, you know, if this is something that you're really passionate about, keep pursuing it. and just keep developing that response. And then based on, because you don't have to have, fulfilled that entire internship by the time you apply, but you can say, now you have your foot in the door, now you will be starting this, and you will be, and you can even, very, very shortly, but you can mention this, you believe it's gonna lead you to the next step that you want in your career.
All right, no, that makes perfect sense, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So specifically about the personal insight questions on like the creative side. So I'm transferring for math, but I'm also a music major. So I recently got my associates in music. So when I talk about my creative side, do I mention that I'm like a music major or specify? Because it's not something like that I picked up. It's something that I've been doing for like since 6th grade. So I don't know if I want to like really mention that and be like, oh, I've been paying for this long, and it's not like really like a non-major because it is my major, or it is a major I'm also pursuing, and I don't know how to really specify it when I end up writing the question.
Do you see math and music?
Yes.
Okay, if you can explain that to us, if you can explain that to us in a way that a regular person like myself, that is, I like math, but I'm not into it as much as you. I wish I could learn an instrument, but I don't know how. If you can explain that to somebody like me, to where I understand it, honestly, I think I'll be blown away. I'd be like, oh, this two different ranges, right? And I'm sure you can see math and music, but putting them together into a way that I understand, I'd be like, okay, this guy's gonna get a good score. Those are my thoughts. But here's the thing: can you convey it? And that's where you got to talk to Michelle, and you got to talk to the folks at Rio Hondo and get that there, and then we can see how. I mean, that's interdisciplinary right there, and that's something that we definitely value.
Yeah, definitely, Carlos. Like, write it out however it comes to your mind. The other thing I probably should have said to all the students is just write it and don't worry about it being perfect the first time. Because once you write something and then you bring it to us in the WIC, then we can help you move things around, shift things, strike things if that needs, add things. It just is so much more helpful when you have something. But I know that like how I am, I don't know if you're like this, but like I feel like, oh my God, I can't even start because I need it to be perfect that first line. Nah, never mind. No one's perfect. So just get it out. Just write something, just get it all out and then bring it to us. That's what the benefit of being early is, that we could then help you shape it to what you really, want to convey about yourself.
All right. This is kind of like a future question. So let's say I do get accepted to UC, I finish my math degree, and then I want to complete my music degree. So once I do that, I have to redo the application again, but this time under music. And it's kind of like, my question is like, I kind of have to write about how I'm still practicing music, correct? Or like a way for them to see that I'm still, like, I'm not forgetting, kind of, because I'm doing like a 2-year gap technically, because I haven't practiced 2 years because I'm finishing the math. Like, how do I explain that, or how do I end up going about that?
So just a couple of things, if I understand you correctly, and let me give you some options. You can always, now it depends on the university, and it depends on their college, the department. So for example, at UC Riverside, I think you can major in math and get a minor in music, or get a double major in music. You can do both. But at UCR, something that you cannot do, you can't major in math, get your degree, and then apply to get a degree in music as a bachelor. Because right now, well, at least right now, we're not accepting students that want to get a second major. And that could be also with many UCs. They're always going to give the priority for the first major, the second, but other UCs too. Now, I know there's some UCs though that their program, especially in the art, it's very impacted. So it might be a little bit more challenging to get into their music program if you're coming in as a math major and then trying to add a double major or a minor. But I don't know. I don't work for them. Don't take my word for it. But it's something to also just have in the back of your mind as you're reaching out to them. And for some of them, they might even want some type of portfolio. Who knows, right? But what I recommend is apply as your math major, and once you choose a university, or as you're choosing the university, talk to reps like myself and ask, hey, can I do a double major with music, or can I do a minor with music? And then, if you feel comfortable with that, then you can be done, even in 2 years. Like, for example, I did a double major, and I finished in 2 years. But after you do that, and you think, hey, you know what, I think I want to pursue a master's in music, you can always do that later. Or if you want to do a master's in math and continue that, you can also do that as well.
All right, yeah, because I know specifically at UC Irvine, they don't have, you can use tag for the music department specifically. They do like this whole thing where you have to do like performance,
Yeah.
and then you have to do like a bunch of like theory and musicianship kind of tests like at separate times. Then you
Yeah.
have to do piano, and then just like a whole place. So it's kind of like difficult for UC Irvine. And for Riverside, it wasn't too difficult. Is
Right.
like, yeah, for minor it's easier. I know for UCLA, I kind of have to talk to the department. They're kind of iffy about it. They really don't want you to do two different majors because they're kind of two different departments. And then some other UCs are fine with it, others aren't.
Yeah, and that is the challenge that you're gonna run into. But I mean, at least you're taking the right step, and you're trying to figure out, which UCs are gonna give you that opportunity, and which ones seems like they won't. And then at one point you're gonna have to make that decision. Now here's the other thing too, the other option, because if you do want to pursue 2 bachelors in 2 different subjects, there's always private schools as well. Or it could, I don't know if the CSUs allow that, but I know with private schools, they create their own rules to some extent, right? So they may allow that and you the option to do a double major. I mean, I'm sorry, to do a second major after you complete your first degree. I just know that at the UCs is a little bit more difficult to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like my alma mater for undergrad is Whittier College, and
Okay.
they definitely, that's the thing, it's interdisciplinary. So I have an English major that wasn't really traditional English. It was sort of journalism and English combined. And I know a lot of people, like one of my friends was, he went on to medical school, but he had a biology and an art degree from Whittier, but you can do that at the small liberal arts schools. I mean, there's, different programs on how you do that, but then they also provide for double majors as well. So that's a good, an option if you're thinking about that, Carlos. Because sometimes we think like that the private schools are going to cost a lot more, which they do, but then they also do give you more financial aid because it's based on the need. So something to consider.
All right, sounds good.
All right, we only have like 4 more minutes. Oscar, did you?
Another is student Angie just joined. I don't know if Angie had any questions, or I think she's connecting to the audio. Let's see. Hi, Angie. So we have just a couple more minutes. I don't know if you have any questions pertaining to like personal insight questions. No, I think she left. Cool. Well, if you don't have any more questions, just know that the Transfer Center is there for any questions that you may have after the presentation. We're always there to support and help you all. If you'd like for us to, take a look at your personal insight, responses, or schedule an appointment with the counselor, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Ernesto, for your time. It's greatly appreciated. And thank you, Carlos, Nicholas, and Dylan for joining us. Hope you all have a good rest of your day.
All right, thank you. Bye.